Hello everybody and welcome. This is Adrian. Thank you so much for joining me today. It's going to be time for some Victoria 2. This is going to be a tutorial series for Victoria 2. Specifically, we're going to be playing with the Historical Flavour Mod, or HFM as they call it. The only reason I'm playing with HFM is because I do think that it adds more depth and flavor to the game. It also actually fixes a couple of some of the quirks that exist with vanilla. There's a few things about the economic simulation in vanilla Victoria 2 that are kind of frustrating. They kind of break the game down and the game really just kind of stops functioning towards the end of the game and later parts of the game. That HFM fixes that and streamlines things and makes things, you know, work the way that they should. So I figured, why not play with HFM? It's a nice, you know, kind of mod to teach new players with. So let's go and jump on in. This is going to be a tutorial series. We're going to be playing, I've decided, as the Empire of Brazil. As you guys can probably tell from this, the title of this video. So the Empire of Brazil is a secondary power, number 15th in the world. They're a constitutional monarchy. And they're 59th in the world for prestige, 33rd in the world for industry, and 31st in the world for the military score. They have a population of 1.57 million adult males. They have about 54% farmers, 30% slaves, and then just a whole assortment of other little categories of laborers here. And they start at war with the Rio Grande do Sul. So we're going to take things really slowly in this game. And I just kind of want to show you guys around, show you guys, you know, the basics of Victoria 2, you know, how to be the ultimate country ruler, you know, how to be able to play Victoria 2, industrialize what's important, what's not important, you know, little quirks and things like that. So it's gonna be kind of a slow campaign. It's gonna be, you know, if you're not really so much interested in kind of, if you want to see things go more quickly, maybe this campaign won't be for you. But I just want to give, you know, new players, I want to explain a lot of the game to new players, or just people who don't have a lot of experience with the game, and just kind of tell them, you know, what's important, what are the things to do that is advantageous, and things that are less advantageous. So let's go and jump on in. Obviously, there will be history down the road. There will be history down the road for you guys to, you know, to talk about, to explore. Well, actually, I mean, I guess we could talk a little bit about the, we can talk a little bit about the history now. So the year is the January 1st, 1836. Obviously, the game is called Victoria 2 because Victoria, Queen Victoria, the Queen Victoria, took power in 1836. That's when she ascended to the throne. So, give me 1 second. Let's actually turn down audio just a little bit. Okay. So, a little bit about the Empire of Brazil, a little bit about the background. So, in 1808, Napoleon invaded Portugal. As you guys know, Portugal's over here. Portugal. And Napoleon invaded Portugal, and the royal court fled from Lisbon. They fled over here to Rio de Janeiro. And Rio de Janeiro became the capital, unofficial capital, of the Portuguese Empire. In fact, they even changed the name of the kingdom from the Kingdom of Portugal to the Kingdom of Portugal, Brazil, and the Algarves. Algarves. I don't know how do you say it. Yeah, how do you say it in Portuguese? I don't know. So, from, you know, turns out the Empire of Brazil is a pretty nice place. And so after Napoleon was defeated and, you know, the royal court could go back to Portugal, the king was actually a little bit reluctant to return to Portugal. He actually kind of liked Brazil. Eventually, they had to go back. And so the king, I believe his name is King Yao? J-A-O-A, I think, something like that. I'm not sure to pronounce it in Portuguese. I believe it was King Yao VI. He left his son. He had a son named Pedro the First, as regent of Brazil. He was to succeed, you know, the king once he was, you know, old and, you know, ready to die. He was to succeed the king as king of Portugal. So Pedro was the regent of Brazil, and obviously, as you can see, Brazil is quite a bit larger and you know, more far away than Portugal is from, you know, anything else, any other possessions it has. So Brazil is very large. It's very powerful. They have a lot of power. And so in 1822, Pedro, the regent of Brazil, under, you know, for his father, would actually declare independence. There's a lot of Brazilian military officers, a lot of Brazilian aristocrats who sided with Pedro and said, declare independence. Don't let Portugal rule over us. Pedro would win the War of Independence. There'd be, you know, a couple battles here and there in the west, in the north, and the southeast, you know, near like Rio de Janeiro, all that kind of stuff. But Brazil would win its independence, and it would be proclaimed a constitutional monarchy. It would be an empire of Brazil, the empire of Brazil. So Dom Pedro, they called him Dom Pedro the First de Bragança, you know, of Brazil. He was the first emperor of Brazil. And, you know, it's funny, actually. Brazil was actually, the Empire of Brazil was actually a fairly democratic constitutional monarchy. Dom Pedro I actually drew up a constitution with the aristocrats and the military of Brazil. It had a bicameral legislature. It was actually there were relatively lenient civil rights policies. There was freedom for speech, freedom for press, freedom of religion. There was slavery, obviously, but comparatively, most average people in Brazil actually had some rights. It wasn't as authoritarian as some of the other monarchies of Europe, especially during the time period of you know, the 1820s. So it was a relatively actually constitutional state, the Empire of Brazil. It was very, very stable. It was very powerful, very wealthy, and you know, there was actually a really bright future for Brazil, and it was kind of up and coming on the world stage once it achieved independence. It was kind of a thing to be watching. The British in particular were very, very interested in Brazilian affairs. In 1825, there's these provinces down here, as you guys can see, Uruguay and the Rio Grande do Sul. In 1825, Uruguay would declare independence from Brazil. It used to be a province of Brazil. I don't think we have cores on there anymore. It used to be a province of Brazil. Brazil used to control Uruguay. Whoopsies. I think I might have accidentally pressed on pause for a second. Okay, let's get over there. So in 1825, Uruguay would declare a war of independence, and a couple of the other countries around here, Paraguay as well as Argentina, would actually try and assist Uruguay and get Uruguayan independence. They would actually eventually win. So that's how Uruguay would become independent. And then in I believe it was like the late 1820s. I want to say like 1828, 1829, 1830. Dom Pedro I's father, the King of Portugal, King Yao VI, he died, actually. And so the only male heir of the House de Bragança was Pedro. So Pedro, the Emperor of Brazil, would become King of Portugal and the King of the Portuguese Empire, including possessions here in Angola and Mozambique and such. And actually, Pedro decided, you know what, I don't really want to rule over Portugal. I'd rather not. So he abdicated from the throne of Portugal, and he gave it to his daughter. So he gave it to his daughter. This was around, you know, like I said, the late 1820s, maybe even 1830. That year screams out to me. And Pedro had a younger brother. Who would go to Portugal and depose Pedro's daughter. So I believe Pedro's daughter's name was Maria, and his younger brother's name was Manuel. So Pedro would abdicate from the throne of Portugal, give it to his daughter. Manuel, his younger brother, would go to Portugal, rouse up a bunch of troops and rouse up a bunch of supporters, mostly conservative, reactionary absolutists, you know, absolute monarchists and things like that. And they would depose Maria, as she was just a child. So she was ruled by regents, you know, Portugal was under a regency. And so in 1831, Pedro would abdicate from the throne of Brazil, give it to his son, Pedro II, Dom Pedro II. He was just a 5-year-old little boy. And Pedro would go to Portugal to try and get the throne back for his daughter, Maria. They would eventually succeed. So Maria would be a constitutional monarch of Portugal with the help of Dom Pedro I, and his son, Dom Pedro II, would take the throne of the Empire of Brazil in 1840, 4 years from now, as a 14-year-old kid. And he would rule from 1840 to 1889 as a very, very effective monarch. Brazil would become basically a middle power in the world under Dom Pedro II's reign. In 1889, there would be a military coup against Dom Pedro II, and the first Brazilian Republic would be proclaimed. So, that's a little bit about the history of the Empire of Brazil. So now, we're going to see what we can do about Brazil. We're going to see if we can be successful as successful as some of these other guys. So we've got a couple of decisions. We've got a couple of decisions here in HFM that are specific to HFM. There's 2 decisions. There's one of them is a splendid isolation. Enabling this feature will enable splendid isolation for the United Kingdom. It will break alliances with any other great power except for Portugal, Ottomans, Belgium, or Japan. The historical option is to say yes. You can go ahead and do that. So we'll go ahead and do that. And then there's colonial railroading. Enabling this feature will allow the AI countries to properly get most of their historical colonies. The following colonies are affected: France, West and Central Africa, Germany, Cameroon, East Africa, New Guinea, and Togoland, and the UK, Nigeria, and Ghana. So the historical option is obviously to have colonial railroading, but if you want a little bit more of a dynamic game, then you can go ahead and not enable colonial railroading. Since we're going to be playing as the Empire of Brazil, we're not really going to be doing any colonization or anything, so we'll go ahead and just enable colonial railroading. It's fine. Okay. So it is, now it's the 2nd of January, 1836. So you have Victoria 2, right? What are you supposed to do? There's many things that need your attention at the beginning of the game. So we'll just kind of walk through all these little tabs right now, and I'll just kind of show you guys around. So here in the production tab, top left, here in the production tab, you can see what kind of goods your country produces. So right now, Brazil, we produce coffee, lumber, regular clothes, tobacco, and furniture. You can click on the production tab. First, your first little section here will be factories. If we have any factories in the country, which we do not, you can actually click this little button here to hide empty states or show empty states. If you want to select a specific factory that produces one thing or another, or you want to filter through, like, hey, I don't want to see any clipper factories, you can do all sorts of stuff. This is all the goods in the game that you can produce via factories. Or they also, this will also give you a list of things that rely on these goods. So you have, say, a steel factory relies on iron, right? You produce steel, but you rely on iron, so you can like filter things out. You know, you can deselect all and select just things that rely or produce on steel, or you can look at things that just rely on iron, all sorts of stuff. That's just kind of how you filter through this. Foreign investment. As a great power, you have the ability to open foreign factories. You know, as say a great power, Empire Brazil, I could open a factory in, you know, the FRCA, and that will boost your industrial score. By investing in other countries, you boost your industrial score. It's kind of tedious. It's a little bit of a tedious mechanic to invest in other people's economies, but you can do it if you want. If you go to the production tab, this, as the tooltip says, shows a production overview of our country. This will show you what types of goods you produce and how they're produced. So there's basically 2 ways or 3 ways to produce things. There's, well, I guess you could say 4. There's craftsmen. Craftsmen work in factories, right? They read, you know, manuals. They function in assembly lines. Craftsmen, that's what they do. There's artisans. Artisans are kind of like middle class, bourgeoisie, sort of guildsmen, I guess you would say. The guildsmen, you know, that you heard about from like the Middle Ages, the Renaissance. Those are artisans. They have small family shops. They make things. So artisans here, you can see artisans. They can produce things like canned food. Craftsmen can also produce things like canned food if you have craftsmen, if you have factories. And then there's raw materials that are produced by either farmers or laborers. So laborers are miners, you know, coal workers, that sort of thing. And then farmers, obviously farmers, they grow stuff in their fields and they have their own little plantations. So your craftsmen, your artisans, your farmers, and your laborers will produce either raw material goods, what you would call inputs, or finished goods, which are outputs. So things like military goods. You know, you can't produce ammunition unless you have some sulfur. You know, you can't produce small arms unless you have some, you know, iron and some wood. So from this screen, you can kind of figure out, okay, what are we producing? What do we make a lot of? What is it that I could use more of? Things like that. And then here you have projects. Projects are, you know, business ventures by your capitalists. If you have capitalists in your country, they will usually invest in projects, and they can build anything from factories to railroads. They can upgrade factories, things like that. But it's very, very expensive. So if you don't have a lot of capitalists in your country, you might want to have your own projects, you know, state-directed economic planning. Let's go to the budget. You can see a little pound there for budget. So you've got your income, expenses. You know, basically, if you've ever taken an accounting class, this is what it's going to look like. Income, expenses, you know. Your daily income, you have 3 classes of taxes: upper class, middle class, lower class. Your lower class is almost always your largest tax base. Ideally, your middle class is larger than either the upper class or the lower class combined. You want a very, very strong middle class if you can get it. You know, if you tax the middle class very little, they can upgrade to the upper class, but if you tax them too much, they can move to the lower class. Same goes for the lower class. If you tax your peasants and stuff too much, they're gonna be broke and rebellious and socialist. And if you don't tax them enough, your economy is gonna be, you know, looking pretty good, but your government will be strapped for money a lot of the time. And then your upper class, if you don't tax your upper class too much, they usually will hang on to their money, or they'll put it in the national bank. That means that they have savings, or they'll invest in certain projects. If you tax them too much, though, they may even demote back to the middle class, so they won't invest in projects. So it's just kind of a balance. It's kind of a balance, but especially at the beginning of the game, you're gonna want to set taxes basically all the way up. You need money for your budget at the beginning of the game. As you can see, we have about 11,000 pounds in the bank. This is our daily either profit or loss. You can see here, there's something here called projected daily balance. This is just a projection. It's not an actual. This guy is your actual. This is your projected daily balance. So, yeah, so these are taxes, upper class, middle class, lower class. We're just going to max out taxes for now. As you can actually hover over what it says you're going to receive. It'll show you by class: farmers, laborers, and soldiers. As you can see here, artisans, we're taxing a lot, bureaucrats, intellectuals, officers. We tax landowners. We actually don't have any capitalists in the country right now. You can actually hover over capitalists. There are no pops of this type in our country. Also, in the lower class here, we don't have any serfs. We don't have any craftsmen yet, so you won't be taxing any of those people. And you can actually see your effective tax rate. So you could tax, in theory, at 100%. That's just what they call a tax rate. But there's something called a marginal tax rate, which is your effective tax. So right now we're at 100% tax, but our tax efficiency is only really 24% because of our marginal tax rate. You know, we're not efficient enough to collect that much money. You know, it's just kind of one of the problems that you have with taxation systems. And then your national bank, like I said, if your pops have enough savings, they'll put the money in your national bank. If you ever have to take a loan, you will first use the funds from your national bank, and then you will get foreign loans. You'll get loans from other countries. So keep that in mind. Having a nice national bank reserve from your pops is usually a pretty nice thing. It's nice to have. So if you can have your pops put money in the national bank, do it. You can see here precious goods. There's a certain resource on the map. I'm not sure if we have any in Brazil. Whoopsies. Okay. We're back. We should be good to go. Okay. On the map, there are... I'm not sure if we have any here. There's a precious goods resource. Might be able to find some over here in Austria. It's kind of like the same thing as a gold mine from Europa Universalis IV. You produce gold and it goes right into your treasury. So that's what precious goods is. So if you produce any precious goods, they'll be directly converted into money. So it's just, you know, it's just a nice thing to kind of have. It's not usually that much. Precious goods are usually not worth much, but you know, it's money, so that's what it is. And then here we have our debt screen. So you can take on debt, interest on that debt. If your interest is greater than your gross income, you declare bankruptcy, just like real life. And then here we have expenses. So you have your industrial subsidies. You can subsidize factories. You can give them money to be able to hire people, to be able to buy goods, pay salaries, things like that. It's useful. It's inefficient, but it is useful. Especially in the early game, you're going to need to subsidize factories to be able to be viable. And then we have military expenses. You have your military costs and your overseas maintenance. You buy goods that fill up your national stockpile. So if you're spending money on your military, your navy, or you're building either factories or forts, shipyards, railroads, things of that sort, government funded projects, you have to buy goods from the world market into your national stockpile. It can get very, very, very expensive, especially maintaining a military. So I can hover over our spending on land units. Right now we're spending a lot of money on ammunition and canned food. Small arms and regular clothes are less. We're spending less money on those things. And we don't have any naval units. We don't have any constructions. So we're not spending any money on that. If you are a colonial power, and you have, say you're Britain, right? Say you're the United Kingdom. Anything that's quote overseas, you have to maintain. So people buying stuff in India or goods necessary for India, it'll show up here, overseas maintenance. Overseas maintenance expenses are calculated with the national stockpile and can't be lowered. So it means basically if you have resource gathering operations, quote RGOs, or you have overseas provinces, overseas factories, you're going to be paying overseas maintenance, and it's a little bit more difficult to manage that expense, you know, because colonies are obviously expensive. So say I could make, you know, the British Cape Colony an official state of the British Empire, and if I wanted to build factories out here, I would have to pay a lot of overseas maintenance for their goods that they need for their factories or their railroads or etc. So if you want to be a colonial power, keep overseas maintenance in mind, because it can be very, very, very expensive. And then we have a few tabs over here. We have education, administration, social spending, military spending. Military spending goes towards paying your soldiers and officers. The higher your military spending, the more quickly your soldiers will promote from soldiers to officers, but also the more people will be enticed to join the military as professional soldiers. These aren't conscripts. These guys are not conscripts. These are full-time professional soldiers. Education is obviously your educational budget used to pay intellectuals and teachers. The higher your teacher salaries, the more teachers you're going to have, and the more efficient your education efficiency is. Ideally, your education efficiency should be maxed out always. This needs to be at 100% all the time if you can afford it. Then you have your administration. They allow your bureaucrats to be well paid, have a good lifestyle, and they can maintain a healthy bureaucracy, and it increases your tariff efficiency and the rate of pop promotion. So the more efficient your taxes are, or the more efficient your bureaucracy is, the more bureaucrats you're going to have, but also your pops are going to be able to promote at a higher rate compared to a bureaucracy that sucks, you know? There's this here. This is your country administrative efficiency. It determines the effectiveness of social reforms and tariffs. It also affects your ability to fight organized crime. We'll get into crime a little later, but basically you want your country administrative efficiency to be damn near at 100%. You can actually come over here to your administrative map mode, and you can actually take a look at each one of your states. Here in the lower right corner, it'll actually tell you the state administrative efficiency. You're going to want your states to also have 100% administrative efficiency. That's how you collect the most money from your taxes. You can fight organized crime the best. You want your bureaucracy to be healthy. Okay. And then social spending is things like unemployment and pensions. We don't have any at the start of the game. Later on, we'll get into it. And then you have tariffs. Obviously, tariffs are a tax on imported goods. The higher your tariffs, the more money you're going to make from any goods that your country imports. So right now, you can actually see here in this trade tab, we export coffee, tropical wood, and cotton. Those are things that we have too much of, so we export them to the world market. But you can see here, our top 3 imported goods are grain, coal, and fish. If I was to have a tariff on those goods, we would make money from the tariff, but those goods would be more expensive. And so our people, here, you can see all of our people will suffer. It's more expensive to get what they need. These little circles here are what they call life needs. Or just needs, I guess you could say in general. Kind of like desires, you know? So yellow means that needs are partially met. Green means that, you know, the basic, you know, like water, clothes, food, the basic stuff like subsistence, you know, those needs are met. Blue are things like everyday needs, you know, a little more luxury, I guess you could say, you know, toothpaste or soap, you know. When you have a lot of blue, it means that your everyday needs are being met. When you have a lot of green, it means your life needs are being met. When you have a lot of yellow or red, it means basically your people are suffering. They're not getting the goods that they need to survive. Either because they're too broke or there are no goods to buy. And then there's like a light blue. I'm not sure if we can see it here. Here at the very bottom, getting luxury needs, you'll see a light blue circle. If you see light blue, it means that your people are so well off that they can actually buy nice consumer goods that are luxuries. They're not really essential to survival. So you always want to see a lot of light blue. You never want to see yellow or red. So tariffs will affect that significantly. Significantly. Tariffs also have a base efficiency and administrative efficiency. So the better your bureaucracy, the better you're going to collect tariffs. Okay. And then we have diplomatic balance. Basically, if you ever have to pay war reparations, or you have, you know, a great war and you have to pay a war indemnity, it's going to show up here. You're either going to get a surplus from this or you're going to get a deficit, usually. One more thing on tariffs. Try to not have tariffs ever. They're okay in the early game, sort of, kind of, when you don't have any factories. But tariffs, because they impose an extra cost on imported goods, they can actually drive your factories into bankruptcy. So try not to have tariffs too much. Usually, tariffs are not like, well, yeah. I'm just gonna leave it at that. There's a little bit more to it in real world economics, but for the purposes of Victoria 2's economic simulation, try not to have tariffs ever. Or if you have to tariff something, keep it minimum. Like a 5 to 10% tariff is usually okay. 15, 20% or more is pretty painful. Okay, so that's it for the budget screen. Let's go into, before this episode gets too long, I might actually take a quick break here. We're going to talk about technology, politics, population, trade, diplomacy. Well, now, all right, let's go into technology. Technology is good. So you have your technology screen. First thing we need to look at is what's your administration. You have a traditional, there's several types of what they call tech schools or tech administrations. Right now we have the traditional academia. So we receive no penalty and no benefit for any one of these categories. You have 5 categories: Army, Navy, Commerce, Culture, Industry. I would argue that your Army, your Industry, and your Culture are some of the most important techs, the most important categories out of the entire game. Commercial is not bad either, but I would say Navy, especially if you're not really a colonizing power, Navy tech is probably like the least useful. Army, obviously, having a good army is really, really important. Even a couple military techs over another country can be the difference between domination and defeat. Particularly here in Culture, there's this philosophy tree. Philosophy is straight buffs to your research points. So let's talk a little bit about research points. Research points are generated up here. You can see up here, this little hourglass guy. So your research points are your progress towards technology. Think of them as monarch points. The thing is your research points are modified from a variety of different factors. One of them is your rank in the world, your status as a power, great power, secondary power, or a civilized, just a regular power, and your literacy. Your literacy rate is over here, right? Your literacy, the average literacy of our population right now is 5.5%, which is absolutely terrible. Literacy is, you know, the amount of your population that can read and write. Ideal literacy is about 100%. Horrible literacy is like 0. You know, so we have 5.5% of our adult male population can read in the year 1836. That is awful. So we need to improve that. The higher your literacy, the more research points you generate. In addition, your research points is influenced by the amount of intellectuals you have in your country. If you have a lot of intellectuals, there's a lot of research, a lot of, you know, debate and discussion. Obviously, you're going to make advances in technology quicker. The less intellectuals there are, the less research points you're going to have. So, researching when you can any one of the philosophy texts as soon as they're available to research is probably one of the single most important things you have to do in the game. Every philosophy tech makes every technology after it cheaper because you acquire those techs faster. So as you can see, we already have Enlightenment philosophy. It was unlocked in the year 1836. We already have it researched. It gave us research points 50%. Idealism by Hegel is going to unlock in the year 1840. It costs 6,857 research points. We produce 4.58 a day. So it would take a little while to get this. So it'll also give us 50% research points. So in the year 1840, no matter what we're doing here, we're going to want to get idealism as quickly as possible. So we'll try and make that happen. Things like social thought will give you education efficiency and colonial migration. Psychology will give you reinforcement rate. It'll improve your rate of reinforcement for your armies, as well as it'll give your armies regular experience. Things like aesthetics will give you prestige. The more you research down this aesthetics tree, you'll get prestige. Prestige is part of your score over here. It's pretty important. It's basically your cultural development. It's important. Yeah, prestige texts are really important. The research point texts are absolutely important. I would also argue the social thought texts are pretty important. There's actually one down here called biologism, and it allows you to get what's called an invention. An invention is kind of like a random discovery that has usually either a benefit or a negative associated with it. Here you can see where your possible inventions, what types of inventions you can discover. Darwinism, here under biologism, once you research biologism, you have the possibility of inventing Darwinism, which is education efficiency plus 50%. It's pretty huge. 50%. It's awesome. Biologism is unlocked in the year 1850, so, you know, you're going to want that. And that applies for basically, you know, all sorts. I'm not really going to go through the whole tech tree, but you guys kind of get the idea. Having good military tech is really, really essential. Commercial techs like financial institutions, monetary systems will improve your tax efficiency, your administrative efficiency. Economic thought and critique, market functionality and organization will make your factories more efficient and cheaper. With the same amount of goods, you can produce more and they cost less. You're going to want to research those for your capitalists. The farther down you get in these trees, the more cheap it's going to be for your capitalists and things like that to make factories. And so you're going to produce more goods, you know. And then industry is also pretty important. Chemistry and electricity. Going down this route improves your supply limit, so you can have more troops in any one province. And then it also improves things like your pop growth. Your people breed more. You're less, you know, less mortality rate for your babies, less mortality rate for your mothers and things like that. Your women will not die as much from childbirth, and so you have much more people. Population is one of the single most important things in Victoria 2. Having very, very large populations is absolutely essential to running your country and running your country well. Obviously, you have infrastructure. You can get railroads. Metallurgy, mechanization, and power concern basically raw material production or finished goods production. The further down you get in all these trees, the more goods you're going to produce from your farms, your factories, your mines, all sorts of stuff. So always be trying to progress down the industrial tree when there's not anything else that's pressing your attention in technology. Okay. Before this episode gets super, super long, we're going to take a quick break here. In the next episode, we're going to talk about politics, population, trade, diplomacy, and military. And then hopefully we can pause in the game and play as the Empire of Brazil. So I will see you guys in the next episode. Thank you so much for watching. As always, please make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. I'll see you guys very soon. Thanks so much.